Welcome back to Better Than Before. I'm Tony Richards, and my special guest today is Grant Kimball, and he's the CEO of a company called Brand Insight. And Grant is a certified brand strategist through the Brand Establishment, which is a organization that we are both members of. And he's my really good friend, and he's joining us live from Portland, Oregon today. Hi, Grant.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm glad we were able to connect today because I've got some questions that I think will benefit our listeners, and I know that you have a lot of experience to share. Before we get into that, though, why don't you just tell everybody kind of a little bit about your background?
Well, I've been in marketing and brand development for several decades now. Really starting more and focus on marketing and ran a marketing and PR firm for about 15 years. And we evolved that into really focusing on brand development to make ourselves more successful marketers. But in the process, I realized that I really have a passion for helping companies use the power of a brand to start a company, build a company, and then ultimately have a good exit strategy for the company. And so that's really my focus is helping smaller, growing companies think about how that business cycle is going to work and what the exit strategy is and how they can leverage brand to build the value to that point.
So, when we're talking about, first of all, let's just establish like a foundation. So, according to your philosophy, what is the brand?
Ultimately, it is the distinct value that you provide to the customer. That starts with the product or service idea that you have that may or may not exist in the marketplace, but somehow fills a need, and it goes all the way through every experience that that customer has with you, and that experience is something that you have to plan and design. Otherwise, it becomes haphazard, and you let other people define what your brand is about. So it has to be very intentional and planned and disciplined so that you can create that experience and deliver that value that you're looking for in the market.
Let's get into the brand definition. That's kind of what we're talking about. So,
Yeah.
if I'm going to intentionally design a brand for a product or a service or a company, what are the three or four things in your mind that are really key to that designing process?
Well, there's really four main components, and you can't start too early thinking about it. I know that in the startup phase, it's very easy to focus on developing the product or service and getting the funding. Those are really kind of the two priorities of most CEOs. But if you don't put a little bit of thought into the direction of the company down the road beyond that point, then it's awful hard to get out of the startup phase. I think some of the things that are really worth thinking about in terms of the brand really early on is, the first component is really what's the purpose? Why does the brand exist? Why is it relevant to the customer? As there some purpose beyond just the core product or service idea? Yeah, what are you trying to do to improve people's lives and be relevant to them? The second component is the brand identity. What does the brand represent to the customer, and who's behind it?
Isn't that the part that people generally gravitate to the most?
They gravitate toward it in the sense that they know that they need a logo.
Right.
And so brand identity is a lot about creating the symbols that represent your company and represent what it stands for and what that experience is like. But I think most people start and stop with the concept that they just need a logo to launch the business.
I think too that no matter how long people like you go out there and preach at the top of your lungs that a logo is not a brand, I sometimes think that is still what people think.
Absolutely. Most companies, the term brand is the equivalent of the logo and marketing. So it really does go beyond that. And the needs don't have to be super complex in the early phases of starting a company. If you kind of have a sense of what your purpose is, you create the symbols like logos to represent you and have them done in a way that is, very professional and represents you well in the market. You know what the primary benefit is to your customer, and you know how to communicate that promise to the customer in a way that they know why you're valuable to them. And then you always think about that experience that a customer is having with you, whether they're calling you or going to your website or using your product or dealing with anybody in your company, if you've thought through that experience, those are just kind of the simple things that a business in early stages can be thinking about in terms of, really defining what they are about and what they stand for in the market.
So, are there any other steps to defining the brand that we should mention?
Well, there's certainly a process to go through to define the brand. Number one, at the end of the day, a brand is about differentiation. If you are not different, then you're not going to get a foothold in the market and you're not going to be able to maintain your pricing and your margins. You're not going to grow the way that you want to. So you really have to understand that sense of what makes you unique and different and valuable and define the things that support that. So a lot of times in marketing, you hear the terms unique value proposition, unique selling proposition. Those are valuable concepts to define two, three, or four kind of pillars that build your brand and make the business valuable. And so it's important to define those things early so that you know that that's what's guiding your decision making as a company, and it keeps you focused on the prize and on making decisions that are going to build value and not let you get distracted. So those are really the main things. Is you have that sense of what makes you different and why you exist and what those 3 to 5 pillars are that you can build on, and that will keep you focused. And not that they don't change down the road a little bit. At least you're intentional about that change, and you know that the market is progressing and you have to make changes in your business to react.
Speaking of changes and evolution in the brand, where does brand architecture come into play in the process? Is that more of a long-term strategy?
It is a long-term strategy that you want to put a little thought to in the early stages of the company. The essence of an architecture is basically defining the relationships between the components of your brand. So your company is a part of the brand. You might have product lines that each might have their own brand identity underneath that. So it's really defining the relationships between these pieces. And in the early stages of the company, you might really just have the one product idea and you have the name for the company, and you might talk about them as if they're really one and the same. And that's fine in the early stages. I think the challenge for most companies comes into when they get to 10, 20, $30 million and they begin to expand markets, they begin to add product lines or services. Then all of a sudden they want the company to stand for one thing, but they need multiple product brands or service brands underneath that that have different value propositions to different markets. And so they have to begin to figure out a way to pry apart what the brand for the company means, what the brand for the product means, and then add more products. And that's a lot of re-educating the market and a lot of effort that has to go into that. So I think it's really valuable in the early stages of the company to anticipate that you will have additional products and services as you grow, create meaning for the company brand, but create separate meaning for the product brand. Make sure that people understand what the differences between those two things are. Give yourself the room and the flexibility to add more products and services down the road. So, say in the early stages of a company, that's just a little bit that you have to think about. I encounter companies all the time that have a really important business strategy to go into new markets or add new products, but they are really hamstrung by the fact that everybody thinks their company and their old product are the same thing.
I can sit here and think about companies who have, for lack of a better term, branched out, and they have completely liquidated all their equity and goodwill in the brand because now the marketplace is totally confused. And I've also seen some companies who have done what you're talking about extremely well, and they've leveraged that and they've been a lot more successful and made a lot more money. So to me, that particular piece of it that you're talking about right there, you got to be pretty careful with it, I think.
You do. And it really, I know in starting up a business in the early stages, you don't exactly know where it's going to go. And you do have to be flexible and give yourself room to make changes as you discover what the market really needs. So part of this is to really just anticipating that things are going to change and give yourself a framework for making those changes and not confusing the marketplace.
I can think of some people like would go to a supermarket at this time of year and They just want Campbell's chicken noodle soup. And there's chicken noodle soup, there's chicken and stars, there's home style, there's microwavable. I mean, the soup aisle for just Campbell's is half the aisle in the supermarket. And I sometimes wonder, I'm like, wow, are there that many people that like this many varieties of soup? And I don't know the answer, but that's an example of what I'm talking about. I don't know whether it's working well for them or if it's a detriment, but that's sort of an example of really branching out and having a lot of extension in that one brand.
Right. And then imagine, if they tried to take that kind of brand of that warm, comforting, wintry experience with that food and extend it into something that is, what if they wanted to do cold soups, gazpachos or something? You know, have they conditioned the market to think about their brand as just that warm, comfortable thing that they get in the wintertime? Are they setting an expectation in the market that they're really more about, healthy eating any time of year? So you kind of have to think about that experience, what we want your customers to think about you in your total.
Or sometimes things that seem logical are not in the market. So, what if they started thinking, well, people eat crackers with their soup?
Right.
So, let's come out with Campbell's crackers. They go together. I think Budweiser and Bush tried that with, some things that didn't turn out so well. But, well, everybody has snacks with beer, but I'm not sure that worked as well. You talked about business strategy, like entering new markets and things like that. So, how crucial is it for your brand strategy and your business strategy to be linked up?
It's crucial. It's impossible to separate the brand from the business strategy. They are incredibly linked because the thing that you want to be known for, the things that you want to represent, have to be delivered by the business strategy. If you want your customers to have a certain experience, then it's going to impact the way that you sell your product, the way that you train people to represent the product, the distribution channels that you use, the way you package it, the way that you handle customer service, the way that you create your digital marketing experience. All of those pieces of the business and all of the functions that handle it with inside an organization all have to have a guiding principle that they know they have to support. And that guiding principle is the brand. It's the reason for their existence. It's the thing that makes them competitive and different in the market. And so, if each business function isn't asking themselves, what can I do to better deliver on that promise? Then you'll find that the brand has less meaning. It becomes diluted. The market gets confused about what it stands for. So, the business strategy, has to have that principle to align to so it stays focused.
Do you have an example of somebody you think does that very well?
Well, I think in Portland, we're kind of the hub of the sportswear, sports marketing industry. So the crown jewel here in Portland is Nike. So everybody's really familiar with that company and the spirit of athletic competition that they've always stood for, and innovation in their product lines and the materials, and helping people find that inner athlete. So no matter what sport they go into, no matter what product line they come out with, whether it's golf balls or running shoes, that they are always looking to help people feel like they are unleashing their inner athlete and making the best of themselves. And so I think they, over time, have done a really phenomenal job of making sure that everything that they do represents that aspect of their brand.
With a simple swoosh.
With a simple swoosh, which probably was drawn on a napkin over lunch.
Right. But remember all the businesses there for a while. I mean, there for a while, it's probably been 15 years ago, but everybody's logo had to have a swoosh in it because they were trying to get a rub off of, well, that's cool. So let's try to incorporate that somehow.
Yeah, and that is the downside of the lemming mentality of a lot of things in design is, you see a few design principles that big companies have and they get copied by everybody else. And that's where you have to remember that the logo is a symbol of your uniqueness and your personality. And The more that you're just drawing it from other sources, the less it really reflects who you are. And so ultimately, you're going to get really tired of that logo because it just doesn't represent you very well.
What's one thing that businesses can do with their employees to make sure that there's alignment with the brand?
Well, number one is define the brand. Define it really clearly in what the company stands for, what makes it distinct, and then what are the components of the brand, that make that up. So if you want to be known for outstanding customer service, what does that mean to the customer? What does that experience look like? And then you have to connect that then to everybody's job inside the company. So if I work in customer service, obviously I'm going to have a pretty strong connection every day with what it means to deliver excellent customer service. And if I'm in marketing, then I probably know that I need to go out and make sure that our marketing messaging and our campaigns are all built around that concept of excellent service. But if I'm in finance, what do I feel my connection is to that? Or if I'm in manufacturing, what does my connection feel like? So it's really important for the CEO and the leadership team to make sure that it's really clear how everybody's job, how every function inside the organization relates to the brand and how they help deliver it. So in finance, it might be the way you negotiate contracts, the terms that you put in your contracts, the way the contract is delivered, the way that you might thank them when it's done, the way the billing is handled. If there's any questions, how good are you at answering those questions and making the customer feel like that you want to make sure that there's a good experience for them. So it really is taking a look at every function in the organization and making sure that it's really clear that every single person there is responsible for delivering that brand experience, even if they're not the ones working in customer service. There are places throughout a company where a customer is coming into contact with that brand.
I know with a lot of companies, they are very restrictive on how their brand is even used by other people. I mean, you would have to pay them a fee to be able to be aligned with their brand or whatever. And even then, they have very tight controls and restrictions on how it's supposed to be utilized and displayed. And, I even think about like the symbol of the American flag, it can't touch the ground. It can't be flown upside down. It's only flown at half mast on certain events, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the larger your company becomes, the more important it is to control that. But even when you're a smaller company, you put some thought into it. If you're building a product and you're thinking about distribution and who your partners are going to be, well, you want partners that that are clear about what your brand stands for, so that when they have it in their stores or they have it in their e-commerce sites, or in any situation where they are now representing your product or your company, they have to be really clear about where your value is so that they represent it well. And so even as a small company, you have to make sure you're clear about your brand, train distributors or other people that are not working directly for you on how to best represent that brand, so that the customer sees a consistent experience, whether dealing directly with you or not, or dealing with a distributor.
I'll give you another great example. I was going to a website on my phone, and I have a Plus phone, so it's bigger than most people's phones. I mean, the screen size is bigger than the average phone, right? And I get this message off of this website when I go there that says, your screen is not large enough to format this website. And I immediately had a bad impression of that company. I'm like, if my screen's not big enough, nobody's is, right? I mean, they don't have it set up for mobile phones. They lost some equity with me there. So I think all that stuff's important.
Yeah, I run into those kinds of experiences all the time, the same as you, where I in my life use three different platforms kind of continuously, PC and laptop and mobile phone and tablet and all of these things. And And you can tell when a company has thought through the experiences of all of those devices because your interaction with them works well everywhere. But there's so many companies who you find that their mobile site is completely unusable, and that gives you a bad impression about the company. So you do have to be very mindful of how people are interacting with you.
Grant Kimball from Brand Insight is my special guest on this week's show. Grant, how do people find you online? How do they find out more about what you do?
Well, so my website, Brand Insight, so brandinCite.com is my main site. And you can definitely find out just the basic information about the types of companies that I work with, the way that I think about brand, and of course, what my brand stands for.
Wonderful.
Receive weekly coaching tips from Tony Richards delivered straight to your inbox. Whether you're a CEO or an entrepreneur, Tony can help you reach your goals and give you a competitive edge within your industry. Tony's Monday Morning Coaching Memo covers topics ranging from leadership development to teamwork to company culture and more. Text the word leadership to 38470 to sign up for Tony's Monday Morning Coaching Memo, or sign up online at clearvisiondevelopment.com.